We all know Sauron's ring, the One Ring, into which the Dark Lord poured a portion of his own innate power, and so bound his fate to it. But Sauron was not the first of the powers of Middle-earth to bind his spirit to something other than his own body. Long before Sauron ever set foot in the Black Land of Mordor, before the first age of the world, in the deeps of time, amid the unfathomable darkness of the void, Melkor brooded, beholding all creation and despising what he saw. He did not dream, as Sauron did, of ruling over the peoples of that world. His was a mind that longed not for dominion, but for the utter annihilation of all that existed. And so, where Sauron would one day pour his essence into a single artifact, an instrument wrought to bend the wills of elves toward his own purpose, Melkor chose a path altogether more nihilistic. He cast his unholy essence abroad into the very matter of creation, forever staining and tainting the world with his malice. And with that act, that marring of creation, the world itself became Morgoth's ring. Yet this dissemination of his being came at a cost most grievous, for it weakened Morgoth gravely, and the form in which Morgoth spent most of the First Age, as a menacing Dark Lord, not too dissimilar from Sauron in appearance, was in fact his weakened form. For when first he descended upon Arda in the days before days, his might had been overwhelming. Then Melkor saw what was done, and that the Valar walked on earth as powers visible, clad in the raiment of the world, and were lovely and glorious to see, and blissful, and that the earth was becoming as a garden for their delight, for its turmoils were subdued. His envy grew then the greater within him, and he also took visible form, but because of his mood and the malice that burned in him, that form was dark and terrible. And he descended upon Arda in power and majesty greater than any other of the Valar, as a mountain that wades in the sea and has its head above the clouds, and is clad in ice and crowned with smoke and fire. And the light of the eyes of Melkor was like a flame that withers with heat and pierces with a deadly cold. At that time, Melkor knew no equal. In this terrible form, he was capable of spilling the oceans and tearing the mountains asunder. And it was in those days that he drew to his side many lesser angelic spirits, who were known as the Umayyad. Many of these corrupted spirits would come to serve Morgoth as the Balrogs, but amongst their number there was also one more cunning, one who would be chosen by Morgoth to serve as his lieutenant, and he would come to be known as Sauron. Thus did Sauron enter into the service of Melkor as a servant and as the lesser of the two. Yet, as Melkor scattered his essence across the world, his earliest form was lost to him forever, and he bound his spirit permanently to a physical body. And although he was undoubtedly still mighty, especially when compared to the forms of men and elves, he was greatly reduced in stature compared to his previous incarnation. At this point in history, Sauron still retained all of his initial spiritual power, as he had not yet created the One Ring, and he was yet able to change form at will, shifting shapes and at time appearing as a dreadful vampire or a mighty werewolf. Thus, he possessed abilities and powers which Morgoth did not. It is natural to assume the master must always tower above the servant. Morgoth was, after all, the mightiest of all his kind, first and greatest of all the Ainur. But in the pages of the Silmarillion, Tolkien offers us a passage that unsettles that assumption entirely. And as it turns out, the servant would go on to eclipse the master. Sauron, the underling, would become the mightier of the two. Sauron was greater effectively in the Second Age than Morgoth at the end of the First. Why? Because though he was far smaller by natural stature, he had not yet fallen so low. Eventually, he also squandered his power of being, in the endeavor to gain control of others. But he was not obliged to expend so much of himself. To gain domination over Arda, Morgoth had let most of his being pass into the physical constituents of the earth. Morgoth diluted his own being, spreading it thin across the breadth of an entire world. What little of his spirit that lingered afterward within his body was weaker than Sauron. Thus, Sauron, having watched his master's folly unfold before his very eyes, resolved never to repeat his mistake. Where Morgoth had scattered his power, Sauron concentrated his into the One Ring, a single artifact crafted of gold, which magnified and concentrated his power rather than dispersing it. And Tolkien's essay is plain in its judgment. This choice made Sauron the wiser of the two Dark Lords. Sauron, however, inherited the corruption of Arda, and only spent his much more limited power on the rings, for it was the creatures of Earth, in their minds and wills, that he desired to dominate. In this way, Sauron was also wiser than Morgoth. Sauron was not a beginner of discord, and he probably knew more of the music than did Melkor, whose mind had always been filled with his own plans and devices, and gave little attention to other things. As this passage reveals, Sauron inherited a world already corrupted at his former master's hand, and so he needed only reach for that portion of creation in which Morgoth's spirit lingered most thickly and bend it toward his own dark designs. And so it was that Sauron wrought the One Ring from gold. For of all the substances of Middle-earth, gold held within it the highest measure of Melkor's tainted essence. By Tolkien's own reckoning, such sorcery could never have been worked upon clean and unstained matter. And so, the corruption of Melkor, which was already dwelling within the gold that he used, was no incidental detail of the ring's making. It was the very precondition upon which its very existence depended. Morgoth's power was disseminated throughout gold, if nowhere absolute, for he did not create gold, it was nowhere absent. It was this Morgoth element in matter indeed, which was a prerequisite for such magic and other evils as Sauron practiced with it and upon it. It is quite possible, of course, that certain elements or conditions of matter had attracted Morgoth's special attention, mainly, unless in the remote past, for reasons of his own plans. For example, all gold in Middle-earth seems to have had a specially evil trend. Morgoth had spent an age softening the ground, as it were, so that great evils, such as the crafting of the One Ring, might one day be possible. Therefore, we can see the ring not only as a masterwork of Sauron, but as a part of Morgoth's ring also. And if gold held a greater measure of Melkor's spirit than other substances, then this raises yet another question. Was Morgoth's spirit spread evenly across every continent, or was the influence of Morgoth's ring felt more keenly in certain parts of Middle-earth? Tolkien's answer is unambiguous. The marring of Arda settled unevenly, with Morgoth's influence being felt thicker in Middle-earth than in the Undying Lands, for example. It was for this same reason that Frodo, alone among mortals, was granted passage over the sea to Aman, a realm largely untouched still by the evil that afflicted him. Frodo was sent or allowed to pass over sea to heal him, if that could be done before he died. He would have eventually to pass away. No mortal could or can abide forever on earth or within time, so he went both to a purgatory and to a reward for a while, a period of reflection and peace and a gaining of a truer understanding of his position in littleness and in greatness, spent still in time amid the natural beauty of Arda unmarred, the earth unspoiled by evil. And unbeknownst to nearly all who dwelt in Middle-earth, virtually all matter carried some trace of the Morgoth element, a residue baked into the very stuff of creation, which means that everything, even the flesh and bone of which every living body was made, carried within it, in some measure, a pull toward darkness, a leaning, however faint, toward evil ways. And for this reason, the war against Morgoth was extremely difficult. It could never have resembled the Third Age war against Sauron, for example. For with Sauron, however difficult and costly the road was, a clean solution existed: to find the One Ring and to unmake it. Morgoth's ring, however, granted no such path to victory. One cannot cast a mountain range into a volcano. One cannot melt an ocean down to nothing. And Tolkien states plainly that to erase Morgoth's influence entirely would have demanded nothing less than the utter destruction of the world. But in this way, Morgoth lost or exchanged or transmuted the greater part of his original angelic powers of mind and spirit, while gaining a terrible grip upon the physical world. For this reason, he had to be fought, mainly by physical force, and enormous material ruin was a probable consequence of any direct combat with him, victorious or otherwise. This is the chief explanation of the constant reluctance of the Valar to come into open battle against Morgoth. War against him might well end in reducing all Middle-earth to chaos, possibly even all Arda. Thus it was that the Valar delayed for many years before marching to war against Morgoth in the fullness of their strength and glory. But this was, of course, not due to a policy of appeasement or cowardice, but due to a grim and sorrowful understanding that a war devastating enough to overthrow Morgoth might well cause untold destruction. The cure, it seemed to them, may in fact be worse than the disease. And when at last they did march in that terrible reckoning, which would forever be known to history as the War of Wrath, the cost matched every fear that had stayed their hand for so long. Whole realms of Middle-earth were swallowed beneath the waves in that conflict, and fair Beleriand, cradle of so many civilizations, was lost forever to the waves of the sea. So where, then, does this leave us? With a Middle-earth bearing an enduring stain, baked permanently into the fabric of all creation, such a conclusion seems bleak indeed. And yet the marring of Arda is not so dire a fate as first it may appear, for the evil designs of Melkor, however black their essence, could ultimately serve only to bring about ends that Melkor had never conceived of. And Eru Ilúvatar once spoke to Ulmo of this strange fact in the following passage contained within the Silmarillion. And Ilúvatar spoke to Ulmo and said, "Seest thou not how here in this little realm in the deeps of time, Melkor hath made war upon thy province? He hath bethought him of bitter cold immoderate, and yet hath not destroyed the beauty of thy fountains, nor of thy clear pools. Behold the snow and the cunning work of frost. Melkor hath devised heats and fire without restraint, and hath not dried up thy desire, nor utterly quelled the music of the sea. Behold rather the height and glory of the clouds, and the ever-changing mists, and listen to the fall of rain upon the earth. And in these clouds thou art drawn nearer to Manwë, thy friend, whom thou lovest." Then Ulmo answered, "Truly, water is become now fairer than my heart imagined. Neither had my secret thought conceived the snowflake, nor in all my music was contained the falling of the rain." And so, as age gave way unto age, the dark designs of Melkor came to produce themes he had never intended. For light cannot truly be known without the darkness that defines its edges, and heroism has no true meaning without some evil to stand against. And in the end, the world entire would actually be the richer for Morgoth's influence having been woven into it. The elves had a name for this wounded, unhealed state of the world in which they lived: Arda Mard. But they held also a hope for something that lay beyond it. The elves had the notion that the end of men would somehow be bound up with the end of history, or as they called it, Arda Mard, Arda Sata, and the achievement of Arda Healed, Arda Envignanta. Arda Healed is thus both the completion of the tale of Arda, which has taken up all the deeds of Melkor, but must, according to the promise of Ilúvatar, be seen to be good, and also a state of redress and bliss beyond the circles of the world. And so, the elves held that, at the very end of time, Arda Mard shall give way at last to Arda Healed. Yet this is no ending in which the marring is simply erased, as though the wound had never been dealt at all. It is instead an ending in which every deed of Morgoth is gathered up, and folded into a wholeness that could never have existed without him. So the next time you read of some once noble soul, unmade by the lure of a hoarded treasure, or a jewel of surpassing beauty setting kin against kin, remember that Tolkien never intended for such moments to be read as simple fables of temptation or ordinary parables of greed. He conceived of them as threads within the deepest logic of the world he had built, a world in which Morgoth's fingerprints remain pressed into the gold, into the stone, and into the blood of every living thing that walks upon Middle-earth. And there they remained ever after, as a part of the indelible legacy of Morgoth's ring.